Imagine holding the phone with trembling hands, knowing the next 5 seconds could end your life. Ava, a simple maid in the city's most feared household, had one rule: never disturb the boss. But when she saw what his new fiancé was doing to his elderly mother, the woman who built the Moretti empire from nothing, the rulebook burned. She dialed the number everyone feared. "Come home now," she whispered, terrified. "She's going to destroy her." What happened when Raphael Moretti walked through those doors wasn't just a rescue. It was a revelation that would shatter the underworld. You think you know Mafia stories? You aren't ready for the truth behind the Moretti walls. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a good Mafia drama. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another story. See you in the next one. Rain did not merely fall over the Moretti estate in the Hamptons that night. It attacked. Wave after wave of gray water lashed against the reinforced glass, as though the sky itself were pouring its fury onto the earth. Inside the granite walls, the air was always 10 degrees colder than it was outside. People called it the Raphael Moretti effect. Even when the master of the house was in Milan, thousands of miles away, his presence still seeped into every corner of the mansion. It hid in the gleaming black marble floors that reflected human figures like a mirror. It lurked behind architectural angles sharp as knife blades, and it strangled every sound, turning the entire villa into a luxurious tomb filled with suffocating silence. Ava Sinclair had worked there for 6 months. She had learned that in this house, being invisible was the only way to survive. She moved like a ghost, dusted as though the statues could feel pain, and never, ever looked anyone directly in the eye. But there was one person who saw her. Giovanna Moretti sat in the library as she did every rainy night. She was 78 years old, her silver hair pinned high, her back still straight as it had been in her youth, even though her heart had grown frail. Beside her lay a family photo album, its spine worn soft from being opened too many times, and on the wall hung the portrait of Salvatore Moretti, the man she had loved for 50 years before he passed away. Once, they had been 2 poor immigrants from Sicily, arriving in New York with nothing but their bare hands and a dream. Salvatore had the hands and the daring. Giovanna had the mind and the patience. Together, they had built the Moretti empire from nothing. And though the outside world knew Salvatore only as a terrifying don, those on the inside understood that Giovanna had always been the one who made the most important decisions. Now she had heart disease. The doctors said she needed to take her medicine regularly, avoid stress, and above all else, live in peace. But peace was a luxury in this house, especially since Paige Whitmore had appeared. Ava was dusting the bookshelves when the library door opened. Paige entered as though she owned the world. She stood 5'9", with platinum blonde hair cut to her shoulders, and blue eyes like sharpened sapphires. She was beautiful in the way ice was beautiful. Cold, perfect, deadly. The marriage between Paige and Raphael was not love. It was a business arrangement meant to strengthen the alliance between the Moretti Empire in New York and the Whitmore Syndicate in Chicago. To Raphael, Paige was a strategic partner. To the servants, she was a merciless tyrant. And to Giovanna, she was a nightmare dressed in designer clothes. Paige glanced at Giovanna, then at Ava, her lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes. She said nothing, only let her gaze travel once around the room as if taking inventory, then turned and walked away, the sharp click of her heels against the stone floor sounding like the countdown of a timed bomb. When the footsteps faded, Giovanna let out a sigh. She lifted a hand and beckoned Ava closer. Ava hesitated for a second, then stepped forward, her head bowed low the way she had been taught. But Giovanna took her hand and pulled her down into the chair beside her. The older woman's hand was warm, utterly unlike the coldness of the house. "You remind me of myself when I was young," Giovanna said, her voice roughened with age but still steady. "Stubborn, resilient, and pretending you do not matter." Ava did not know how to answer. No one in this house had ever spoken to her as though she were a human being rather than a piece of furniture. Giovanna gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Never let anyone tell you that you are not worthy. Listen to me. Never." Outside, thunder rolled like a warning. Ava did not know that within the next few hours, she would have to choose between her own safety and the woman whose hand was holding hers. And that choice would change everything. Raphael Moretti was in Milan, more than 6,000 miles from New York, closing a $40 million deal. He would not be home for 2 weeks. 2 weeks in which Paige Whitmore would hold complete control over the house. That night, The storm grew fiercer. Wind shrieked through the cracks in the doors like the whisper of an omen. Ava was clearing dishes in the kitchen when she heard noise from the living room. Not the sound of ordinary conversation. It was an argument. She knew she should not be curious. In this house, curiosity was the fastest way to find trouble. But she recognized one of the two voices as Giovanna's, and the old woman's voice was trembling. Ava slipped down the hallway, her footsteps light as a cat's. She stopped beside the living room door, which stood slightly ajar, and looked through the narrow opening. Her heart nearly stopped at the sight inside. Giovanna was standing face to face with Paige, a brown envelope clutched in her hand. Her face no longer carried the kindness Ava knew so well. This was the face of the woman who had once built an empire beside her husband, hard, decisive, and filled with fury. "I know who you are, Paige," Giovanna said, her voice cold as steel. "I had you investigated. I know about Connor Walsh, the head of the Irish mob, my family's enemy, and you are sleeping with him." Ava had to cover her mouth to keep from gasping. Connor Walsh. She had heard that name before, in the whispered conversations of the bodyguards. The leader of the Irish mob, the sworn enemy of the Moretti Empire, and Paige, Raphael's fiancé, was having an affair with him. Paige stood motionless for a second, only a second, but in that brief moment, her perfect mask cracked. Then she recovered herself with terrifying speed. "Is the proof in that envelope?" Paige asked, her voice sweet enough to be poisonous. "Let me see it. I will give this to Raphael." Giovanna tightened her grip on the envelope. "The wedding will never happen. You will never become my daughter-in-law." Paige stepped forward, quick as a striking snake. She snatched the envelope from Giovanna's hand and tore it to pieces in front of her. Shreds of paper drifted down to the floor like snow. "What do you think you are doing?" Paige laughed, but her blue eyes were cold as ice. "You are an old woman whose time is over. Do you think you still matter? Do you think Raphael will listen to you?" Giovanna stepped back once, but she did not lower her head. "My son will know the truth." "The truth?" Paige moved closer, forcing Giovanna back against the wall. "The truth is that Raphael needs me. I am the bridge to the Whitmore Syndicate. I am the future of this empire. And you? You are only the past, a weak old woman with a failing heart, sitting around looking at pictures of her dead husband and waiting for her turn." Giovanna said nothing. She only looked at Paige with the eyes of someone who had once faced enemies far more dangerous than this. But that silence seemed only to make Paige angrier. "Do you want to know what your future looks like?" Paige hissed through her teeth. "After the wedding, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in the cheapest nursing home in New York. No one will come to visit. No one will remember you. You will die alone, surrounded by the smell of urine and disinfectant. You would not dare." Giovanna's voice shook, but it remained strong. "I would dare anything," Paige said. Then she thrust both hands hard against Giovanna's chest. The old woman fell onto the freezing stone floor. Her hand flew to her chest, and her face twisted with pain. Her heart was hurting. Giovanna tried to reach for the medicine bottle on the table, but she could not. She gasped for breath, her eyes squeezed shut. Paige stood there, watching, unmoving, offering no help. She simply observed as though she were watching a dull television program. A servant rushed to the doorway, her face pale. "Miss Whitmore, should I call a doctor?" "No," Paige said, her voice so calm it was horrifying. "She is only putting on a show for attention. No one is to do anything." Then she turned and walked away, the sound of her high heels echoing across the stone floor. Ava waited until Paige had completely disappeared before she ran into the room. She dropped to her knees beside Giovanna, her heart pounding so violently it felt ready to burst. Ma'am, I am here." She grabbed the medicine bottle from the table, shook out 2 pills, and placed them into Giovanna's mouth. She lifted the older woman's head and helped her swallow them with a sip of water. Giovanna's breathing slowly steadied, but her face remained deathly pale. Ava helped her up and guided her to the nearest armchair. A bruise was already darkening on her wrist, where it had struck the floor when she fell. "I have to call Mr. Raphael," Ava said, her voice trembling. "He needs to know." "Do not." Giovanna gripped Ava's hand with surprising strength. "Do not tell Raphael." "Why not?" "You were just... If Raphael knows, he will kill that girl." Giovanna looked straight into Ava's eyes. "And that will destroy my son. I do not want my son to become a murderer because of a woman who is not worth it. I will find another way. Promise me, do not tell anyone." Ava wanted to protest. She wanted to scream that Paige had nearly killed her. But Giovanna's eyes were pleading with her, and Ava could not refuse the only woman who had ever treated her like a human being. "I promise," she whispered, even though her heart was breaking. She helped Giovanna back to her room, tucked a blanket over her, and sat beside the bed until the old woman drifted into an uneasy sleep. Ava had just risen to leave when a voice sliced through the darkness. She turned around. Paige was standing in the doorway, her arms folded across her chest, her blue eyes burning in the dim light. "What did you see?" Paige asked, her voice sweet as honey, though her eyes belonged to a venomous snake. Ava lowered her head, her heart hammering wildly. "I did not see anything, miss." Paige stepped closer and stopped right in front of Ava. She seized Ava's chin and forced her to look up. "You are a smart little servant," Paige said slowly, each word like the stroke of a blade. "So listen carefully. If you breathe a single word to anyone, you will disappear. No one will ever find you. No one will remember that you existed. You are only an orphaned servant no one cares enough to notice. Gone as though you had never been born. Do you understand?" Ava swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. "Yes, I understand." Paige let her go and smiled with satisfaction. "Good. Now get out." Ava lowered her head and left the room, her legs shaking beneath her. But as she moved through the dark hallway, her hand curled into a fist so tight that her nails bit into her palm. She had promised Giovanna she would not speak, but how long could that promise survive when Paige so clearly had no intention of stopping? Ava sat by Giovanna's bed for hours. The room lay in darkness, lit only by the faint glow of a bedside lamp, while the rain kept striking the windows without pause. Giovanna was asleep now. Her breathing had grown steadier with the medicine, but her face was still pale as paper. The bruise on her wrist had deepened into a dark purple-black, stark against her fragile skin. Ava looked at the woman lying in the bed and could hardly believe it. This was Giovanna Moretti, the woman who had once stood beside her husband and built an empire from nothing. The woman who, according to whispered stories, had once made notorious bosses tremble. Now she seemed as fragile as an autumn leaf, as though one hard gust of wind might shatter her. And Paige Whitmore was the storm closing in. Ava shut her eyes, her thoughts spinning. She was only a servant, minimum wage, no family, no one who would remember her if she vanished. Her job was to dust statues and scrub marble floors, not to involve herself in the affairs of powerful people. She had promised Giovanna she would not speak, but what did that promise mean if Giovanna did not live long enough to know it had been kept? Paige would not stop. Ava had seen that in her icy blue eyes. It was not the heat of sudden anger. It was the cold calculation of a predator. Today, it had been a shove. Tomorrow, what would it be? Forgetting to give her medicine? A fall down the stairs? An accident no one could ever prove? 2 weeks. Raphael would not be home for 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, Paige could do anything. If I do nothing, Ava thought, then in 2 weeks there will be nothing left for him to come home to. She looked down at her own hands, a servant's hands, rough from work, nails cut short, unpainted, the hands of a nameless woman. But those hands had lifted Giovanna up, had given her medicine, had held her hand when she was afraid. Perhaps nameless hands could still do something that mattered. Ava pulled her phone from the pocket of her uniform. It was a cheap phone, its screen cracked in one corner. She scrolled through her contacts and stopped at one name. Boss. That number had been given to everyone who worked in the house with only one rule attached to it. Never call unless the house was on fire. Literally. Only when flames were swallowing everything were they permitted to disturb Raphael Moretti. To call for any other reason meant losing your job, or worse. Ava looked at Giovanna again. The bruise, the frail breathing, the closed eyes, with lines of worry etched deep even in sleep. She pressed the call button. 1 ring. Ava's heart pounded like a war drum. 2 rings. She almost hung up. 3 rings. Then the line clicked open. Speak. A deep bass voice came through, with no greeting, no question about who was calling, only a command. Behind it, she could hear the hum of a car engine and men speaking Italian. Ava swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. Mr. Moretti, this is Ava, the servant from the estate. Silence. The kind of silence that hung in the air before a bomb exploded. When Raphael spoke, his voice was colder than the storm outside. Why are you calling this number? Is the house on fire? No, sir. Is my mother hurt? Is she bleeding? No. Not physically, sir. But Raphael cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. Do you have any idea what you are asking me to do? I am in the middle of a $40 million deal, in a meeting with a man who could kill me for showing disrespect. And you, a servant, are telling me to walk away from all of it because of a quarrel between women? Ava drew in a deep breath. This was the moment that would decide everything. She could apologize, hang up, and go back to her invisible life. Or she could tell the truth and accept whatever followed. She thought of Giovanna, of the warmth of the older woman's hand around hers, of the words, "Never let anyone tell you that you are not worthy. You need to come home now," Ava said. Her voice trembled, but it did not weaken. "Miss Whitmore, she is destroying Mrs. Giovanna. I cannot stop her. I tried, but she does not care. If you wait 2 weeks, there will be nothing left of your mother for you to come home to." I looked into her eyes, sir. That was not anger. It was a plan. The silence stretched on. Ava could hear her own breathing, heavy and quick. She could hear the rain, the wind, the pounding of her heart as if it were trying to break through her ribs. Then Raphael spoke, his voice low and so slow it was terrifying. "You are giving me your word, with your life, that what you are telling me is true." Ava did not hesitate. "I give you my word, sir, with my life." 5 seconds of silence, long as a century. Ava felt each second like a year, each heartbeat like the ticking of a clock counting down. She did not know what she was waiting for. Fury, dismissal, a threat. "Do not take your eyes off my mother," Raphael said. "I will be home in 8 hours." Then the call ended. Ava stared at the dark phone screen, her hand still trembling. She did not know whether she felt more relieved or more afraid. Perhaps both. Raphael Moretti was coming home, and when he arrived, everything would change. 8 hours of waiting felt like 8 years. Ava did not sleep. She sat in the chair beside Giovanna's bed, her eyes fixed on the old woman's pale face, her ears straining for every sound in the house. Outside, the storm had weakened, but the rain still fell in a thin, steady whisper, as though the sky could not stop crying. Giovanna slept uneasily. From time to time she murmured in her delirium, her lips moving around a single name. "Salvatore. Salvatore, my love." Ava held her hand, not knowing what else to do except remain there. She looked at the clock. Only 2 in the morning. 6 hours still remained. 6 hours that felt as long as an entire lifetime. Around 3 in the morning, Ava heard laughter. Paige's laughter. Rising from downstairs, bright and sharp as shattered crystal. Ava looked at Giovanna. The old woman was sleeping deeply now, her breathing even. Ava hesitated for a second, then stood. She needed to know what Paige was doing. She needed to know what her enemy was planning. Ava slipped down the staircase, her footsteps light as air. She had learned how to move like something unseen in this house, and now that skill was more useful than ever. The sound of laughter led her to the small sitting room in the east wing, the room Paige often used as her private retreat. The door stood slightly open. Blue light from a laptop screen spilled into the dark hallway. Ava pressed herself against the corner of the wall and looked through the narrow opening. Paige was sitting on the sofa, with the laptop resting on her knees. On the screen was the face of a man Ava had never seen before, hair red as flame, a long scar running from his temple to his left cheekbone. And that smile was like a razor blade, sharp and dangerous. Connor Walsh. Ava recognized him at once. She had heard the bodyguard speak that name with a mixture of hatred and fear. The head of the Irish mob, the sworn enemy of the Moretti family. And now he was laughing, with Raphael's fiancée, as though they had been lovers for years. Perhaps they truly had. After the wedding, the plan stays the same, yes? Connor asked, his voice rough and gravelly like that of a man who had smoked for many years. "Of course," Paige replied, lazily swirling a glass of red wine between her fingers. "The old woman goes to the nursing home first. We will find a reason. I will tell Raphael she needs professional care, that staying at home is no longer safe for her health. He will object, but I will persuade him. I always persuade him." "And after that?" Connor tilted his head, the scar in his cheek tightening when he smiled. After that, Paige gave a careless shrug, as though she were speaking about the weather. "An accident will happen, a fall down the stairs, choking on food, the wrong medication, anything at all. She is old and weak. No one will suspect a thing." Ava had to cover her mouth to keep from crying out. Her heart pounded wildly, blood rushing to her head until she felt dizzy. They were talking about killing Giovanna, killing her as though she were nothing more than a piece on a board that needed to be removed. And Raphael? Connor continued. He will be too consumed by grief over his mother to realize what is happening. Paige took a sip of wine, her blue eyes glittering in the glow of the screen. I will stay beside him and comfort him, play the perfect wife. Little by little, I will take control. First the finances, then the relationships. And by the time he understands, it will already be too late. The Moretti Empire will belong to us. Connor nodded, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. Remember this. When it is done, we split it 60-40. I do not do charity. Paige nodded, her lips curving into a sweet smile. Of course, my love. 60-40. Just as we agreed. But Ava saw what Connor did not. The look in Paige's eyes when she said it. There was no sincerity there. Only the cold calculation of someone already planning to betray the very man she was making promises to. Paige had no intention of sharing anything. She was playing everyone around her like puppets on strings. I miss you, Paige whispered, her voice sweet as honey. Only a few more weeks. Then we will have everything. Connor laughed, the scar on his face wrinkling. I miss you too. Keep Raphael under control. Do not let him suspect a thing. Do not worry. Paige lifted her finger to her lips, kissed it lightly, then blew the kiss toward the screen. He suspects nothing. He thinks I love him. The call ended. Paige closed the laptop, stretched like a lazy cat, then rose and walked out of the room. Ava pressed herself deeper into the darkness, holding her breath until the sound of Paige's footsteps faded into the distance and disappeared completely. She was trembling, not from cold, but from the realization that she had underestimated just how dangerous this situation truly was. This was not bullying. This was not some petty conflict between a mother-in-law and a future bride. This was a murder plot, a conspiracy to seize an empire, and Giovanna was only the first step. Ava returned to Giovanna's room, sat down beside the bed, and held the old woman's hand, as though she feared Giovanna might vanish if she let go. She had done the right thing when she called Raphael. Now she could only pray that he would arrive in time. At 5 a.m, the sky began to shift from black to gray. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung heavy, as if waiting for something. Then Ava heard it, the sound of an engine, not a car, a helicopter. She ran to the window and pulled the curtain aside. A black helicopter was descending onto the landing pad behind the estate, its blades tearing through the damp air. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, black hair, black suit, and an aura like a storm walking on 2 legs. Raphael Moretti had come home. Ava stood at the top of the staircase, looking down into the grand hall when the front doors opened. Raphael Moretti entered like a storm walking on 2 legs. She had seen him a few times during her 6 months of working there, but always from a distance, always in passing, like watching lightning from the far side of the horizon. Now he stood at the foot of the stairs, and Ava understood why the entire underworld trembled at this name. He was just under 6'3", with black hair dark as ink, cut short and immaculate. His jaw was square, as though carved from granite. His gray eyes, cold as steel in winter, swept through the room with the calculating precision of a predator. His black suit was flawless, not a single wrinkle in it, despite the fact that he had just flown 8 hours across the Atlantic. The moment he stepped inside, the air in the house changed. The temperature seemed to drop another 5 degrees. The servants who had been cleaning all stopped at once, lowered their heads, and retreated toward the walls as though trying to make themselves invisible. That was the Raphael Moretti effect. He did not need to say a word. He did not need to issue a command. His presence alone was enough to make everyone bow. Raphael looked at no one, asked no questions. He went straight to the stairs and began to climb, each step solid and heavy as the beat of war drums. Ava quickly stepped back, but he had already seen her. His gray eyes settled on her face for 1 second, as though acknowledging her existence. And then he passed without saying a word. Ava followed behind him at a safe distance, her heart pounding wildly. She did not know what she was supposed to do. Run. Explain. Wait. Raphael stopped in front of Giovanna's bedroom door. He stood there for a moment, his hand wrapped around the doorknob but not turning it, as though he were gathering himself for whatever he would find inside. Then he pushed the door open and stepped in. Ava remained at the threshold, not daring to enter, yet unable to leave. She saw the moment Raphael looked at his mother. Giovanna was still asleep. Her silver hair spilled loose across the pillow, her face pale and hollow. The purple bruise on her wrist stood out like a silent accusation. Raphael stood motionless beside his mother's bed. And for the first time, Ava saw something she had never expected: vulnerability. He sat down beside the bed, so gently that he made no sound at all. His large hand, the same hand that had signed hundreds of death sentences, now held his mother's with a tenderness Ava had not believed him capable of. His jaw was clenched tight, but his eyes, those cold gray eyes, were now filled with pain. He did not speak. He only sat there, holding his mother's hand, looking at her face as though trying to memorize every line in it. Giovanna stirred, her eyes slowly opening. The moment she saw her son, tears spilled at once. "Raphael, you came home." "I came home, Mama," Raphael said, his voice gone rough. "I am here now. No one will hurt you again." They held each other's hand in silence for a while. Then Raphael turned and looked at Ava, who was still standing in the doorway. Gray eyes met amber eyes. "Come in," he ordered, though his voice was not as cold as Ava had expected. "Close the door." Ava obeyed, her heart hammering in her chest. She stood near the door, her hands twisted together with nerves. Raphael rose and stepped closer to her, though he still kept a distance between them. He was nearly a head taller than she was, and standing this near, Ava could feel the force of him radiating outward like heat from a furnace. "Tell me," Raphael said, his voice low and even. "Everything. From the beginning. Do not leave out a single detail." Ava drew in a deep breath and began. She told him about the weeks Paige had mistreated Giovanna while he was away, the cruel little remarks, the unreasonable commands. She told him about the night before, about the envelope of evidence, about the confrontation between Giovanna and Paige. She told him about the shove, about Giovanna's weakened heart racing out of control, about Paige forbidding anyone to call a doctor. She told him about the threat Paige had made against her, and she told him about the video call at 3 a.m, about Connor Walsh with the scar on his cheek and that razor-sharp smile, about the nursing home plan, about the staged accidents, about the plot to seize the Moretti Empire. Raphael listened without interrupting her a single time. He stood as still as a statue, but Ava noticed the small changes, his jaw tightening more and more, his knuckles turning white where his hand gripped the bed frame, his gray eyes shifting from coldness into storm. When Ava reached the part where Connor Walsh spoke about splitting everything 60-40, Raphael suddenly turned his back. He walked to the window and stared out at the gray sky beyond it. The storm had passed, but the clouds still hung low and heavy. The silence dragged on. 1 minute. 2. Ava did not dare breathe too loudly. When Raphael turned back, his eyes were no longer winter steel. They were storm, thunder, a fury held in place only by iron will. But he did not shout. He did not break anything. He only looked at Ava with an expression she could not read. "You risked your life to save my mother," Raphael said, his voice low and measured. "You knew what the consequences might be. Paige could have killed you. I could have refused to believe you and dismissed you. Or worse, and yet you still called me. Why?" Ava looked straight into his eyes. She did not know where the courage came from, but she did not lower her head. "Because she was the only person in this house who saw me, sir," she said. Her voice trembled, but it did not weaken. Not as a servant, not as a ghost, but as a human being. She held my hand and told me that I mattered. In 6 months here, she was the only one who ever did that. Raphael looked at Ava, truly looked at her. Not the way he had before, looking through her as if she were nothing. Not the way a master looked at a servant, but the way one person looked at another, when everything they thought they understood had suddenly shifted. The silence lasted a few more seconds. Then Raphael gave a single nod, slow and decisive. "I will not forget this," he said. "You saved my mother. And I, Raphael Moretti, never forget a debt." He stepped past her and opened the bedroom door. "Go get some rest now. You have been awake all night. I will handle everything from here." Ava started to leave, but stopped at the door. "Sir," she asked softly, "what will you do to her?" Raphael did not turn around. "You do not need to know. You only need to know that from this moment on, no one in this house is permitted to lay a hand on you. No one." Then he walked away, leaving Ava standing there with her heart racing and a strange feeling rising inside her. For the first time in 6 months, she no longer felt invisible. Raphael did not wait long. The moment he left his mother's room, he ordered Bruno Santini to summon Paige to his study, and he told Ava to come with him. She tried to refuse, but one look from him made it clear that argument was not permitted. She was a witness. She needed to be there. Raphael's study was in the west wing of the estate, a dark room lined with bookshelves that rose all the way to the ceiling and dominated by a heavy desk made of black oak. The curtains were drawn shut, blocking out the gray light from outside. The only illumination came from the fireplace, where flames leaped and cast ghostly shadows against the walls. Raphael sat behind the desk, his back straight, both hands resting on its surface. In front of him lay a brown envelope. Ava stood in the corner of the room, trying to disappear into the darkness. She did not want to be here, but she understood why he needed her. Her word against Paige's would never be enough, but her presence, a living witness to every crime, would make denial impossible. The door opened. Paige walked in as though she were arriving at a cocktail party instead of a reckoning. She wore a pure white silk dress, her blonde hair falling softly over her shoulders, and the sweetest smile Ava had ever seen spread across her lips. "Raphael," Paige exclaimed, her voice full of false delight. "You are home early. I missed you so much. How was the trip?" She stepped forward as if to embrace him, but Raphael looked at her only with eyes as cold as ice. He did not rise. He did not return her smile. He did not say a single word. Paige stopped in the middle of the room. Her smile faltered slightly, though she fought to hold it in place. "What is wrong, my love?" Raphael still said nothing. He simply pushed the envelope across the desk toward her. She hesitated for a second, then picked it up and opened it. Inside was a photograph. A still image from one of the house security cameras, clear and sharp. It showed Paige shoving Giovanna to the floor. For an instant, Ava saw Paige's perfect mask crack. Her blue eyes widened. Her lips pressed together. A flash of fear appeared and vanished. Then she recovered herself with frightening speed. "It was an accident, Raphael," Paige said, her voice still sweet, though threaded now with strain. "She is confused. She lost her footing. I was only standing nearby. The camera has no sound. You do not know what really happened." Raphael remained silent. Then he spoke, his voice low and slow like distant thunder. "And the plan with Connor Walsh?" Paige froze. "The nursing home?" Raphael continued, each word like a bullet. "The accident after the wedding? The fall down the stairs? The choking? The 60-40 split? Was that an accident too?" This time, Paige could not hide it. Real fear, deep and unmistakable, flashed through her sapphire eyes. She stood there as if nailed in place, unable to speak. "You," she began, but Raphael cut her off. "Did you think the cameras in this house recorded only pictures?" He rose to his feet and slowly came around the desk. "Every room is wired for sound, every conversation, including your video call with Connor Walsh at 3 a.m. Paige stepped back. For the first time, she looked like prey instead of predator, but she recovered quickly and struck back. "You believe those recordings?" she shouted, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You believe a servant over your own fiancé?" She pointed toward Ava, who was standing in the shadowed corner. "A homeless orphan you picked up off the street?" She would say anything for a promotion, for attention. "Can you not see that she is using you?" Raphael stopped directly in front of Paige, towering over her by a full head even in her high heels. "Yes," he said, his voice cold as ice. "I believe her." Paige stared at him, her mouth parting in disbelief. "Because she has something you never will," Raphael continued, looking straight into Paige's eyes. "Loyalty that does not need to be bought. She risked her life for my mother while you were planning to kill her. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave this house. The engagement is over. You cannot do this," Paige said, her voice shaking now. "Your father and my father signed an agreement, the alliance between our families." "Alliance?" Raphael laughed, but there was not a trace of amusement in the sound. "You were planning an alliance with my enemy to steal my empire. Do not talk to me about alliance." Paige stood there for a long moment. Her expression shifted from fear to rage, then into something colder, calmer, more dangerous. The mask fell away completely. "Do you think I ever wanted to marry you for love?" she asked, her voice like ice. "My father sold me to this family like property. Go, Paige, make the family proud." That is what he said to me. I was never allowed to choose my own life. never allowed to love who I wanted, never allowed to do what I wanted. At the very least, I will take back what I deserve." For one brief moment, Ava almost felt sorry for Paige, sold by her own father like an object, forced into a loveless marriage. But then she remembered Giovanna lying on the cold floor with a hand pressed to her chest, and the pity vanished. "You could have chosen to become better," Raphael said, his voice steady and unshaken. "You chose to become a murderer. Get out of my house." Paige looked at him for a long time. Then she laughed, a sound as cold as winter wind. She turned and walked toward the door, but stopped at the threshold and looked back over her shoulder. "You will regret this, Raphael," she said, her voice sweet in a way that was almost terrifying. "You do not know who you are standing against. My family does not accept humiliation. And she smiled, "I never lose." Then she walked out, her heels echoing against the stone floor. The door shut behind her. Ava remained in the dark corner, hardly daring to breathe. She did not feel relief the way she had expected she would. Instead, a sense of dread began to creep through her. Paige was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat gracefully, and her threat had not been empty words. No one knew that when Paige stepped beyond the gates of the Moretti estate, she pulled out her phone and made a call. There was only one short message: "The plan has changed. Move sooner. The charity gala night." And on the other end of the line, Connor Walsh smiled, the scar on his cheek drawing tight. Understood. 3 days passed in a false kind of peace. Paige had left the estate that very night, taking with her her Louis Vuitton suitcases and her cold, simmering hatred. There had been no tears, no pleading. She had walked away like a dethroned queen, her head still held high, her eyes still promising revenge. But from that moment on, the atmosphere inside the Moretti estate changed completely. It was as though someone had opened the windows after years of keeping them shut, letting light and fresh air pour in at last. Giovanna recovered with surprising speed. She began walking in the garden, her hand resting on Ava's arm as she pointed out the rose bushes she had planted 30 years earlier. Color slowly returned to her face. Her cheeks were no longer pale as paper, but touched now with a healthier warmth. Her laughter began to ring through the rooms, something Ava had never heard in all her 6 months of working there. Without Paige, the house became an entirely different place. Ava still did her work, dusting and cleaning, but she could feel the change in the way people looked at her. The other servants no longer treated her as though she were invisible. They nodded to her. Some of them even smiled. News of how she had saved Mrs. Giovanna spread quickly through whispered conversations. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Ava was dusting the collection of antique watches in the sitting room. The pocket watches sat inside a glass cabinet, each one a work of art that had survived for hundreds of years. She lifted them out one by one, polished them carefully with a soft cloth, and placed them back. But when she reached for the last one, an intricately engraved gold watch, her hand slipped. The watch fell. Time seemed to slow as Ava watched it drop through the air. Then came the sharp sound of impact as it struck the marble floor and shattered into dozens of pieces. Ava froze, her face draining of color. She knew how much that watch was worth. A year of her wages, perhaps more. She would be dismissed. Or worse, she would spend the rest of her life paying for it. Footsteps sounded behind her. Ava turned and saw Raphael standing in the doorway, his gray eyes lowered to the broken pieces on the floor. "I am sorry," Ava said, her voice trembling. "I will pay for it. I will do whatever it takes. Please do not." She could not finish the sentence. She waited for the fury, waited for the shout, waited for the order to leave. But Raphael only stepped closer, looked at the broken pieces, and then looked at her. His eyes were not angry. They were softer than Ava had ever seen them. "It is only an object," he said calmly. "You saved something that cannot be replaced." He stepped past the shattered pieces as though they were nothing, ordered another servant to come clean them up, and then walked away. But before leaving the room, he stopped at the door and glanced back at Ava, only for a second. A look she could not decipher. Then he was gone. That evening, Raphael summoned the entire household to the dining room. He announced a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum at the end of the week, an important event for making a social reappearance after the broken engagement to Paige. "Mother needs to go out," he said, looking at Giovanna with that rare gentleness in his eyes. "She has been inside too long." Giovanna smiled and nodded. Then Raphael turned to Ava, making her start in surprise. "And you," he said in a voice that did not allow argument. "You are coming with us." Ava opened her mouth to protest, but Giovanna had already taken her hand and given it a gentle squeeze. "Come with us, child," she said. "You deserve one night of rest." After dinner, Bruno Santini, the family's loyal steward, went to speak with Raphael in the study. Ava happened to be passing by when the door stood slightly open, and she overheard their conversation. "Boss, Paige has been unusually quiet," Bruno said, his voice low and troubled. "There has been no movement from her or from the Whitmore Syndicate. No calls, no messages, nothing. It is as if she vanished." Silence followed for a moment. Then Raphael's voice came, low and thoughtful. "That is exactly what worries me, Bruno. A snake goes quiet before it strikes." Ava stood in the hallway, her heart beating faster. She looked out the window, where the night sky was clear and full of stars. Everything appeared peaceful, but deep down, she knew that peace was only an illusion. The storm was coming. She just did not know when. That afternoon, Giovanna called Ava into her bedroom. When Ava stepped inside, she stopped cold at the sight before her. Lying on the bed was an evening gown, the color of midnight, the kind of deep blue that looked like the sky just before the last of the light disappeared. The silk was soft as flowing water, scattered with tiny crystals that shimmered like stars. "This is for you," Giovanna said, smiling when she saw the stunned look on Ava's face. "You are going with us as a guest, not as a servant." "I cannot," Ava stammered, taking a step back. "I do not have the right. I am only what?" Giovanna interrupted, her eyes bright with mischief. "Only the young woman who saved my life? Only the one who dared to stand up to Paige Whitmore? Only the bravest person I have met in many years?" Ava did not know what to say. Giovanna rose, came over, took Ava's hand, and led her to the bed. "My son looks at you differently now," Giovanna said softly, as if sharing a secret. "And I see the way you look at him. Do not deny it." Ava blushed and tried to turn away. "I would not dare." "Would not dare what?" Giovanna laughed under her breath. "Love or hope? I was the daughter of a little bakery in Sicily when I met Salvatore. He was the son of a powerful family. Everyone said we did not belong together. Everyone said I was not worthy." She gave Ava's hand a gentle squeeze. "But real power does not live in bloodlines or money. It lives here." She placed a hand over the left side of Ava's chest, where her heart was pounding wildly. "In the heart. Put it on, child. Let me see how beautiful you are." An hour later, Ava stood in front of the mirror and did not recognize the woman looking back at her. The midnight blue gown hugged her waist and fell in a soft flare to the floor, making her look taller, more graceful. Her brown hair had been swept up, revealing the long line of her neck and the delicate curve of her collarbone. One of Giovanna's makeup artists had worked a kind of miracle on her face, drawing out the amber in her eyes until they shone like gemstones. This was not Ava Sinclair, the housemaid. This was someone else, someone she had never met before. When Ava came down the grand staircase, her heart was beating so hard it felt ready to burst. She gripped the banister tightly, afraid she would trip, afraid she would tear the expensive gown, afraid everyone would look at her and laugh at the absurdity of a servant girl pretending to be a princess. Raphael was standing in the great hall with his back to the staircase. He was wearing a black suit, his dark hair swept back, and he was adjusting his tie in front of the large mirror. At the sound of footsteps, he turned around and stopped. His hand froze in the middle of straightening his tie. His gray eyes widened, just slightly, and he looked at her. Not the way he used to, not a glance that passed through her as if she were not really there. Not the look of a master at a servant, but the look of a man at a woman. Ava reached the last step and tried to keep her voice calm, though her heart was racing out of control. "It is still me, sir, just with more fabric." Raphael opened his mouth, then closed it, opened it again. He, a man who always knew exactly what he meant to say, a man who could silence an entire room with a single sentence, now could not seem to find the words. "You," he began, then stopped. "You look different." Giovanna stepped out from the hallway, smiling like a conspirator. "He means you look beautiful," she said, winking at Ava. "My son has never been very good at complimenting women. After more than 30 years, I am still waiting for him to tell me I am beautiful." Raphael looked at his mother with mild annoyance, but there was something softer in his eyes. "You are always beautiful, mother," he said, then turned back to Ava. "And you? You are too. Let us go. The Metropolitan Museum that night looked like a palace from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the vast hall. Champagne flowed like a river, and everywhere were the most powerful faces in New York. Politicians, businessmen, film stars, and underworld kings in expensive suits. Ava felt like a fish pulled out of water and dropped into the middle of high society. Every step she took felt like walking a tightrope. Every glance that landed on her made her want to shrink into herself. But Giovanna held her hand tightly, and Raphael walked beside her like an invisible wall of protection. With them beside her, Ava slowly grew steadier. She lifted her head, kept her back straight, and learned how to smile with quiet mystery instead of fear. Then the moment came. A group of businessmen approached to greet Raphael, and he introduced them one by one. When it was Ava's turn, he placed a hand at the small of her back, a small gesture, but one filled with protection. "This is Ava Sinclair," he said, his voice clear and firm. "The woman who saved my mother's life, not the servant, not the maid, not the employee. The woman who saved my mother's life." Ava felt as though she were dreaming. Curious eyes turned toward her, and whispers moved outward in ripples. But she did not care. All she could feel was the warmth of Raphael's hand at her back, and the way he stood beside her as if she belonged here. Everything was perfect, like something out of a fairy tale, until Ava happened to glance toward the far end of the hall, and her heart turned to ice. Paige Whitmore was standing there in a gown red as blood, setting off her blonde hair and porcelain skin. She was beautiful in a deadly way, like a rose with poisoned thorns, and beside her stood a red-haired man with a scar on his cheek and a smile like a blade, Connor Walsh. They were looking straight at Raphael, and they were smiling, the smile of predators who had found their prey. Paige did not wait long. She walked straight toward where Raphael was standing, her high heels striking the marble floor like the beat of war drums. Connor Walsh followed just behind her, that razor-edged smile never leaving his mouth. "Raphael!" Paige cried out, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I cannot believe you had the nerve to show your face. After everything you did to me." She placed a hand against her chest, her expression a perfect portrait of heartbreak, like an actress accepting an Academy Award. "I was devastated when you broke our engagement for no reason. I thought we loved each other." Ava saw Raphael's jaw tighten, but he kept his composure. He understood immediately what was happening. Paige was performing the role of the victim in public. She was laying the groundwork for something larger. Her tone, her wounded expression, all of it had been carefully designed to make Raphael look like the betrayer. "Paige," Raphael said, his voice cold as ice. "This is not the place for this conversation." "Why not, my love?" Paige tilted her head, tears glistening in her eyes without falling. "Are you ashamed of the way you treated me? Ashamed that you threw me away like something old and worthless?" Curious eyes began to turn toward them. Whispers spread like fire. This was exactly what Paige wanted. Then everything happened at once. The lights went out. The entire ballroom fell into complete darkness. Screams rose from every direction, the sound of shattering glass, the crash of tables and chairs falling over, and then gunshots. 2, 3. The blasts cracked through the enclosed space, deafening, echoing like thunder. Ava was shoved by the panicked crowd. She stumbled, fighting to keep her balance, her eyes straining to find Raphael and Giovanna in the darkness. Flickers of light burst from raised cell phones, from the red glow of exit signs, creating broken fragments of motion like scenes from a silent film. Then she saw it. Raphael was on the floor, one hand gripping his thigh. Blood was spreading beneath his fingers, soaking into the red carpet, black in the dim and broken light, and standing over him, holding a smoking gun, was Joey Caruso, Raphael's trusted bodyguard for 8 years, the man he had trusted to protect his family. Joey raised the gun and pointed it straight at Raphael's head. His hand was shaking, but his eyes were set with grim determination. "Sorry, boss," Joey said, his voice rough and strained. "Their money was worth more than loyalty. Nothing personal. It is just business." Ava did not think, did not weigh the danger, did not consider the consequences. She simply acted. Her hand snatched up the silver champagne tray from the nearest table, heavy with crystal flutes still half full of sparkling wine. She swung it hard, striking Joey square across the wrist. There was a sickening crack of bone. Joey screamed in pain, and the gun flew from his hand, skidding across the stone floor into the darkness. "You!" Joey roared, turning toward Ava with madness in his eyes. "You damned servant!" He lunged for her, but he was too late. A figure appeared out of the crowd like a ghost. Bruno Santini. The older steward drove Joey to the floor in a single motion, swift and precise like a seasoned fighter. He pinned both of Joey's arms behind his back and pressed a knee into the middle of his spine so hard the man could not move. 8 years, Joey, Bruno said, his voice cold as steel but shaking with fury. I taught you everything. I treated you like a son, and you sold yourself for money. Bruno lifted his head and looked at Ava. Girl, get the boss up. We need to move. Now. Ava rushed to Raphael and dropped to her knees beside him. Blood had already soaked through the leg of his trousers, but when she looked closely at the wound, she saw that the bullet had passed through the outer part of his thigh, missing the main artery. Painful, but not fatal. She helped him to his feet, pulling one of his arms over her shoulder. He was heavy, but she did not care. Where is Mrs. Giovanna? Ava asked urgently. I got her out through the back the moment the lights went out, Bruno said, still holding Joey pinned to the floor. She is safe in the car. Now go. I will deal with him later. They pushed through the panicked crowd toward the emergency exit. The lights still had not come back on, and in the confusion of the darkness, no one paid them any mind. But as they neared the door, Ava heard the wail of police sirens in the distance, and then she saw something worse. On the large television screen mounted in the corner of the hall, an emergency news bulletin had already begun to run. The footage flashing across the screen was a cleverly edited video. Raphael Moretti attacks former fiancé at charity gala. Infamous Mafia boss causes chaos at the Metropolitan Museum. Police in pursuit. The video made Raphael look like the aggressor, the man who had started the violence. Paige was shown crying, terrified, flawless in the role of the victim. There was no sign of Joey shooting Raphael, no evidence of the real plot. Chisign planned this in advance, Ava realized in horror. Every piece of it had been calculated. The blackout, the gunshots, the fake video. It had all been a perfect trap, and Raphael had walked right into it. Boss. Bruno appeared beside them, his face drawn tight. The police are almost here. Our car is waiting at the back, but they will lock down every road. We cannot go home. Paige knows all the safe houses, Raphael said through clenched teeth, the pain sharp in his voice. She has the codes, the list. She knows everything. There is one place left, Bruno said. One place no one knows about. No one still living except me and you. Raphael looked at Bruno for a long moment. Then he nodded, his expression pained for reasons deeper than the wound in his thigh. The house in the Bronx, my grandparents' old place. They ran out the back door and into the night. Behind them, the police sirens were drawing closer and closer. Ahead of them, there was only darkness and the thinnest thread of hope. Bruno led the way through the museum's staff corridors, where pale fluorescent lights replaced the splendor of the main hall. Ava supported Raphael at her side, her shoulder soaked with his blood. Giovanna followed behind them, her steps unsteady yet stubbornly refusing to fall behind. They pushed through the emergency exit and ran into the night. Rain had begun to fall, cold drops lashing their faces like whips. The sound of police sirens echoed from the front of the museum, growing closer with every passing second. Bruno led them to the parking lot behind the building, where an old gray Honda Civic was waiting. The car was so ordinary it was almost invisible, the kind of vehicle no one bothered to look at twice. Get in, Bruno ordered, yanking open the back door for Ava and Raphael. Move. Ava helped Raphael into the back seat. Blood from his wound had already soaked through his expensive suit, staining the black fabric a dark, spreading red. His face was pale beneath the streetlights, but his gray eyes remained alert, and even weakened. His voice still carried command. We cannot go back to the estate, Raphael said through clenched teeth. Paige knows every safe house. She has the codes. She has the list. She knows everything I have. Giovanna settled into the front seat, then turned back to look at her son, her eyes full of worry but holding not a single tear. She reached through the gap between the seats, found Ava's hand, and squeezed it gently. Do not worry about me, child, she said, her voice strangely calm. Worry about my son. He is stubborn, but he is everything I have. Bruno slid behind the wheel and started the engine. There is one place left, he said, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. A place no one knows about. Raphael lifted his head and looked at Bruno. His expression shifted from pain, to recognition, to resistance. No, he said, not there. Boss, it is the only place, Bruno replied, his voice firm. Even your father kept that house a secret from everyone. Paige cannot know about it. No one still alive knows it exists except me and you. Raphael closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath that sent a sharp pulse of pain through the wound. A moment passed, then he nodded. Go. The Honda surged into the night, blending into the traffic on the streets of New York. No one looked twice at the battered old car. No one guessed that inside it sat the most powerful mafia boss in the city, bleeding and on the run. The rain came down harder and harder. The city lights blurred against the windows like enormous tears. Ava sat still and let Raphael lean against her shoulder. She could feel the weight of his breathing, the heat of his body, and his blood soaking into the midnight blue gown that only hours earlier had made her feel like a princess. Giovanna sat in the front, her lips moving in silent prayer. She did not turn around, but Ava knew she was praying for her son. Bruno drove in silence, his seasoned eyes flicking again and again to the rearview mirror to make sure no one was following them. Ava looked out the window and watched New York pass through the curtain of rain. Only a few hours earlier, she had been standing in a glittering museum, introduced as the woman who saved the mafia boss's mother. Now she was sitting in a battered old car, holding a wounded man, fleeing from the police and from enemies who wanted them dead. The most powerful mafia boss in New York was now only a wounded man running through the night with his aging mother and a housemaid. And strangely, Ava did not feel afraid. She felt determined. She would not let them die. Not tonight. Not ever. The Honda came to a stop in front of a narrow house on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. The old red brick house stood wedged between a row of nearly identical buildings, so modest it was almost invisible. The faint smell of roasted peppers and damp wood drifted from somewhere nearby, mingling with the scent of night rain and cigarette smoke from the bar on the corner. It was nothing like the estate in the Hamptons. No marble floors, no crystal chandeliers, no suffocating coldness. This was a place of ordinary life, where people lived and loved and suffered the way ordinary people did. Bruno opened the door and helped Ava get Raphael out of the car. This is where the boss was born, Bruno explained briefly as they stepped inside. His grandparents lived here before there was an empire. No one still alive knows about this place except me and him. Inside, the house was small, but warm. A crucifix hung on the wall, along with black and white photographs of unsmiling Italian men. The furniture was old and dusty, but carefully preserved. The whole place smelled of time and memory. They laid Raphael across the old kitchen table, a solid oak piece that had surely witnessed years of family meals. Blood from his wound had soaked half his trousers and was dripping onto the tiled floor. His face was pale as paper, his lips dry and cracked, but his eyes were still open, still fighting to stay alert. Ava did not wait for anyone to tell her what to do. She searched beneath the sink and found an old first aid kit. In the kitchen cabinet there was an opened bottle of whiskey, gauze, needle and thread, antiseptic. She spread everything across the table like a battlefield doctor preparing for surgery. She cut open the leg of Raphael's suit trousers with a pair of scissors, exposing the wound. The bullet had passed through the outer part of his thigh, leaving both an entrance and an exit wound. It had missed the main artery, lucky, but the bleeding had not stopped, and if they did not deal with it, he would lose too much blood. "This is going to hurt," Ava said, lifting the bottle of antiseptic. Raphael opened his eyes and looked straight into hers. His gray eyes were still sharp, even through the pain. "Do it." She poured the antiseptic over the wound. Raphael did not scream. He only clenched his jaw and gripped the edge of the table so hard the wood creaked as though it might split. The tendons stood out in his neck. Sweat gathered on his forehead, but not a single groan escaped his mouth. Giovanna came to stand beside her, her old hands steady despite their age. "Stitch it like this, child," she instructed, her voice calm as though this were an ordinary household chore. "I did this for my husband many times. A mafia life never lacks for wounds." Ava obeyed, the needle piercing skin, the thread pulling the torn flesh back together. Her hands were shaking, but they did not stop. She could not stop. Not now. Once the stitching was done and the bandage wrapped tight, they carried Raphael to the old sofa in the sitting room. The faded floral upholstery looked like the place where his grandmother might once have sat knitting through winter afternoons. Bruno found pain medicine in the cabinet and gave it to him, and not long after, Raphael drifted into sleep from sheer exhaustion. Giovanna also went to rest in the small bedroom at the back of the house, but only after Ava promised that she would watch over Raphael through the entire night. Bruno took his post by the front door, a gun resting across his lap, his eyes fixed on the dark street outside. The house sank into silence. There was only the sound of rain tapping against the roof and the even rise and fall of Raphael's breathing. Ava sat on the wooden floor beside the sofa, her back leaning against it, her eyes never leaving the sleeping man. She studied his face in the dim light filtering through from the street lamp outside. There was no expensive suit now, no cold stare, no untouchable mask of the Mafia boss. He looked younger in sleep, more fragilely. She noticed a small scar through his left eyebrow that she had never seen before, perhaps from some long-forgotten fight. His lips were slightly parted, no longer held in that hard, unforgiving line. His lashes were dark and long, casting shadows on his cheeks. Suddenly, Raphael moved in his sleep, his brow drawing tight as though he were trapped inside a nightmare. One hand lifted, the fingers curling faintly, as if searching for something, or someone. Ava hesitated for a second. Then she reached out and placed her hand in his. Raphael closed his fingers around hers at once, even in sleep. He held on as though afraid she might disappear, and he did not let go. Ava did not pull away. She sat there in the darkness, listening to the rain and to the rhythm of his breathing. She thought of everything that had happened. Of the invisible housemaid she had been only a few days before. Of the phone call that had changed everything. Of the midnight blue gown now stained with blood. Of the man holding her hand as though she were the only thing keeping him afloat. "I will not let them take you," Ava whispered into the darkness, so softly that only she herself could hear it. "I will not let anyone hurt you again." Dawn slowly crept across the sky, pale and gray, seeping through the old curtains. Ava was still sitting there, her hand in his, her eyes heavy with exhaustion yet refusing to close. She did not know that Raphael had been awake for some time. He lay there with his eyes still shut, but he had heard every word, every whisper, every breath, and he could feel her hand in his, warm and steady. For the first time in many years, Raphael Moretti did not feel alone. Day 1, Day 2, Day 3. Time inside the house in the Bronx moved like thickened honey, slow and stifling. The small television in the corner of the sitting room was their only window to the outside world, and what it showed only made everything worse. Paige was winning the war. Her face was on every news broadcast, blue eyes swimming with counterfeit tears, her voice trembling as she told the story of her suffering. Raphael Moretti, the notorious Mafia boss, is currently wanted for assault and disturbing the peace at the charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. Police are conducting an active search. If anyone has information regarding the suspect's whereabouts, please contact the hotline immediately. The edited footage played again and again, showing Raphael as an unprovoked aggressor. There was no footage of Joey shooting him, no evidence of the real conspiracy. Only Paige, flawless in the role of the victim. The Moretti empire had begun to wobble. Bruno reported in every day, his face growing darker each time. The other Mafia families smelled blood, Moretti territory, shipping routes, business relationships. All of it could be carved apart at any moment. Raphael tried to hold the damage back with burner phones, calling old allies, men who had once sworn loyalty. No one answered. They were waiting to see who would win before choosing a side. That was the law of the underworld. No friendship, only advantage. Giovanna was growing weaker. Stress and worry made her heart unstable. She tried to appear strong, but Ava saw the way she had to stop in the middle of walking just to catch her breath, the way her hand trembled when she lifted a cup of tea. Ava cared for her the way she might have cared for her own mother, had she ever been given that chance. She helped her take her medicine, tucked blankets around her when she slept, and sat beside her telling stories when sleep would not come. Ava became the one who kept the little house running. She made pasta from what was left in the pantry, cans of tomatoes and boxes of dried noodles long past their date, but still edible. She washed clothes by hand in the sink. She changed Raphael's bandages twice a day, checking the wound each time for signs of infection. She kept the house clean and warm even while the outside world was falling apart. On the third night, sometime around 3 a.m, Ava could not sleep. She went into the kitchen to boil water, hoping a cup of tea might quiet her mind. The candle on the table cast a warm yellow glow, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Then she heard the uneven sound of footsteps behind her. Ava turned and saw Raphael standing in the kitchen doorway. He was wearing an old shirt of his grandfather's that they had found in a closet, one hand braced against the frame for balance. His face was hollow from blood loss and lack of sleep, but his gray eyes were still sharp. "You should not be up," Ava said, hurrying to help him. "The wound needs rest." "I could not sleep," Raphael answered, letting her guide him to the chair by the kitchen table. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Joey pointing the gun at me." They sat across from one another at the small kitchen table, with only candlelight between them. Ava poured tea for both of them and stayed silent for a moment. Then Raphael spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "You could have run," he said, looking straight into her eyes. "In the chaos at the Met, no one would have noticed. You could have disappeared and started over somewhere else. A new life, a new identity. Why are you still here?" Ava looked down at the teacup in her hands, her fingers tracing circles around the rim. "Because," she began, then stopped. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere. Like someone needs me. Like someone sees me." Silence. The candle flickered. "Ava," Raphael said. "Not Miss Sinclair. Not you. Just Ava." Her name sounded different on his lips. Warmer. Closer. She lifted her head and met his gaze. "I see you," he said, his voice slow and unmistakably clear. "Since the night you called me. Since the moment you dared to risk your life for my mother. I have seen you." They looked at one another in the candlelight, the moment as fragile as a soap bubble. Ava felt her heart beating faster, her cheeks warming even though the kitchen was not warm at all. She wanted to say something, anything, but she could not find the words. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Bruno stepped inside, his face tense, but something like hope was glinting in his eyes. "Boss, I have word from our people at Times," Bruno said, glancing over Raphael and Ava without making any comment about the fact that they were sitting together at 3 a.m. "They are willing to help if we have proof." Raphael straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from softness to sharp focus in an instant. "Proof of what?" "Proof of Paige's conspiracy, of Connor Walsh, of everything. If we can make her confess, they will broadcast it. Live. In front of the whole world." Silence stretched for a moment. Then Ava spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I have an idea." The next morning, they all gathered in the small sitting room to make a plan. Raphael sat on the old sofa with his injured legs stretched out before him. Giovanna sat in the armchair, her hand wrapped tightly around her rosary. Bruno stood by the window, his eyes constantly scanning the street outside, and Ava sat on the floor with her back against the wall, listening as they talked it through. "We do not have evidence," Bruno said, his voice heavy. "The cameras at the Met were shut off before the lights went out. There is no video showing Joey shooting you. There is nothing proving Paige was behind any of it. No witnesses." Raphael ground his teeth together. "All my men have either turned their backs or are waiting to see what happens. No one will dare testify against Paige when she has both the Whitmore Syndicate and the Irish mob behind her. Paige planned this too carefully." Giovanna let out a weary sigh. She did not leave a single opening. Silence settled over the room. Despair drifted into every corner like poisonous smoke. Raphael closed his eyes, his brow tightening with pain and helplessness. For the first time in his life, he did not know what to do. "I have an idea." Ava's voice came softly, but clearly. Everyone turned to look at her. The housemaid sitting on the floor had something in her amber eyes that none of them had seen there before. "Resolve. Paige is greedy and arrogant," Ava said, rising slowly to her feet. "That is her blind spot. She thinks she has already won. She thinks you are out of options, and people make mistakes when they think victory is already theirs." Raphael arched a brow. "What are you suggesting?" Ava took a deep breath. "You pretend to surrender. Reach out to Paige and offer her every shipping route and every account code in exchange for safe passage for you and Mrs. Giovanna to Italy. Tell her you have lost. Tell her you are willing to give up everything to protect your mother." Bruno frowned. "And why would she believe that?" "Because she wants to believe it," Ava answered. "Her greed is greater than her hatred. If she can take the Moretti Empire without war, she will bite like a fish on a hook. And when she comes to collect her prize, you will be wearing a microphone. You trap her into confessing everything, the conspiracy with Connor Walsh, paying off Joey, the shooting at the Met, all of it. And if she does not confess?" Giovanna asked. "She will," Ava said, her gaze hard and steady. "Because she is arrogant. She will want to savor her victory. She will want you to know just how clever she was. That is the fatal weakness of people like her. And when she confesses, I will live stream everything. Live. For the whole world to see. No court. No jury. Only the truth. Raphael looked at Ava, his expression difficult to read. If this fails, we die. All three of us. You understand that, do you not? Ava met his gaze without flinching. If we do nothing, we die anyway. You lose your empire. Mrs. Giovanna loses her son. And I. She stopped, swallowing hard. I lose the only people who have ever treated me like family. At least this way we have a chance to fight, a chance to take everything back. Silence stretched between them. Raphael looked at Ava, truly looked at her, as though he were seeing someone entirely new. Where did the timid, trembling housemaid go? The one who called me that night, he asked, his voice carrying a strange note Ava could not quite name. She died at the Met, Ava answered, her voice steady. The woman standing in front of you is the one who survived. A moment passed. Then Raphael nodded, slow and final. All right, he said. We do it your way. Giovanna rose and came to stand beside Ava and Raphael. She took both of their hands and squeezed them tightly. Her eyes shone with pride and love. Do it, she said, her voice steady as steel. I believe in both of you. Bruno nodded, his expression shifting from doubt to respect. I will contact Paige, he said. I will arrange the meeting. Pier 17. Midnight tomorrow. Enough time to prepare. Ava looked around the small room, at the faces now placing their faith in her plan. The invisible housemaid was now leading the fight against one of the most dangerous conspiracies the Moretti family had ever faced. Life was strange. We will need a microphone, Ava said, already making a list in her mind. And a phone that can live stream with a stable connection. And a backup plan in case everything falls apart. Bruno, can you get those things? Bruno nodded. I will handle it. Then we begin, Ava said, her eyes hard with resolve. It is time Paige Whitmore learned that she is not the smartest person in the room. Midnight. Pier 17 on the edge of the East River. Thick fog rolled up from the black water, cold enough to cut through skin and bone. The lights of Manhattan in the distance were blurred as if in a dream, as though New York itself were dissolving into the night. Rusted shipping containers were stacked into a maze of steel, and the sound of waves striking the dock was like the whisper of the dead. Raphael stood alone in the middle of the pier. He leaned on a cane to keep himself steady, his injured leg still sending sharp pain through him with every shift of weight. Beneath his suit jacket, a tiny microphone was taped securely to his chest, connected by Bluetooth to Ava's phone. He looked like a defeated man who had come to surrender. That was exactly what they wanted Paige to believe. Ava was hidden behind a rusted container about 20 yards away. The phone in her hand was already live streaming, connected directly to the server of the New York Times and to the police emergency line. 50,000 people were watching. The number climbed every second. She held her breath, her heart pounding like war drums. Bruno was stationed atop a container high above, a sniper rifle in his hands, his eyes never leaving Raphael. The old man was the final contingency. If everything fell apart, he would fire. The sound of engines came from the distance. 2 black SUVs tore into the pier, their headlights slicing through the fog. They stopped, and the doors swung open. Paige Whitmore stepped out like a queen entering her own territory. Her white coat swept to her ankles, her blonde hair flying in the river wind, radiant as a fallen angel. Her sapphire eyes glittered with the victory she believed was already hers. Connor Walsh walked beside her, the scar on his cheek tightening when he smiled. 4 gunmen followed behind them, weapons already drawn, surrounding Raphael from every side. Raphael Moretti, Paige called out, her voice carrying through the dark. I never thought you would know when to bow your head. I thought your ego was bigger than that. Raphael said nothing. He only reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, and tossed it at Paige's feet. All the shipping routes, he said, his voice tired and beaten, the account codes in Switzerland and the Caymans. In exchange for safe passage to Italy for me and my mother. We will disappear, forever. You win. Paige bent down, picked up the envelope, and weighed it in her hand. She laughed, a sound both bright and cruel. At last, you understand your place. Raphael nodded, his face pained but resigned. I have to admit it, he said slowly. You are good. Staging the shooting at the Met, buying off Joey, framing me in the media. Impressive. I never imagined you could pull all of that off. Paige tilted her head, her eyes flashing, and that was the moment she made her fatal mistake. Her arrogance would not allow her to stay silent. She wanted to boast. She wanted Raphael to know just how clever she had been. "That is right," Paige said, her voice dripping with smug triumph. "It only cost $2 million to hire Joey to betray you. Cheaper than I expected. 8 years of loyalty for $2 million. Turns out everyone has a price." Connor nodded beside her, grinning in satisfaction. Connor's men fired wild shots to create chaos. Paige went on, carried away by her own victory. The edited video, the perfect media narrative. The public swallowed every word. They love a suffering woman. She turned in a slow circle, the white coat flaring in the wind like angel wings. "And do you know the best part? My father is going to be so proud. He sold me off like property and told me I had to make the family proud. But this piece of property is about to own both empires, Moretti and Whitmore. All of it will be mine." Raphael looked at her, and despite the circumstances, he smiled. It was the smile of a wolf waiting for prey to step into the trap on its own. "You are right," he said, his voice strangely calm. "The public loves a good story, but there is one thing you forgot." Paige frowned. "What?" "They hate liars." Paige looked down at the envelope in her hand, and sudden unease rose inside her. She tore it open. There were no codes inside, no documents, only blank sheets of paper. "What the—" She looked up, her face draining of color. And then Ava stepped out of the darkness. The housemaid now stood with her back straight, her arm raised high, the bright screen of her phone glowing in the night. On that screen, the number was still climbing. 50,000. 60,000. 70,000. "Smile for the camera, Paige," Ava said, her voice steady as steel. "You are live. 70,000 people are watching. And the police are listening." Paige froze, her perfect face twisting with shock and fury. "You," she began. "Everything you just said," Ava cut in, taking one step forward, buying off Joey, staging the shooting, framing Mr. Raphael. "All of it has been recorded. All of it has been broadcast. The whole world just heard your confession." Connor Walsh stepped back, his face turning pale. He looked around, at his gunmen, and Ava saw him calculating, measuring whether it was better to run or to fight. Paige did not calculate. She acted. Her sapphire eyes shifted from shock to madness in an instant. Her hand went inside her coat pocket and came out holding a small gold-plated pistol. "Nobody is going anywhere," she screamed, her voice no longer sweet, only wild. Everyone froze. Paige aimed the gun at Ava, her hand shaking with rage. "You," she hissed through her teeth. "You ruined everything. You damned little servant." And she pulled the trigger. The gunshot tore through the night. Ava shut her eyes, waiting for the pain, waiting for the bullet to tear through her body, waiting for death. But the pain never came. Instead, a body crashed into hers with such force that she fell onto the wet wooden planks of the pier. She opened her eyes and saw Raphael. He had thrown himself at her, using his own body to shield hers. The bullet tore through his shoulder. Blood spread quickly across his suit jacket, then soaked into Ava's white dress as they fell together. "Raphael!" Ava screamed, her voice breaking apart. She cradled his head and saw the blood pouring from the wound. No. He had already been wounded once. He could not survive another shot. Raphael opened his eyes, his gray gaze hazy but still searching for hers. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice weak, yet still full of concern. He had just been shot for her, and the first thing he asked was whether she was safe. "You are insane," Ava whispered, tears spilling down her face. "Why would you do that?" "Why? Because you are worth it," Raphael whispered, the corner of his mouth lifting in the faintest smile. Paige stepped closer, the gun still in her hand, her eyes wild now, the eyes of someone who had fallen completely into madness. "How touching," she hissed, her voice stripped of every trace of sweetness. "Die together then, both of you." She raised the gun and aimed it straight at their heads. Her finger tightened on the trigger. But she never got the chance to fire. A blinding white light ripped apart the darkness. The beam from a police helicopter flooded the pier, turning night into day. The thunder of rotor blades roared overhead. Sirens screamed from every direction. Police cars poured onto the pier like a swarm breaking loose, red and blue lights flashing wildly. "This is the New York City Police Department," a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Drop your weapons. Get on your knees and put your hands on your heads." Ava's livestream had done more than record Paige's confession. It had broadcast it directly to the police, the FBI, and more than 80,000 viewers around the world. Proof that could not be denied. A confession in Paige's own words. In front of the entire public, Paige's gunmen and Connor's men began throwing their weapons to the ground, raising their hands in surrender. They were hired muscle. They had no reason to die for people who had already lost. Connor Walsh looked around, at the police closing in, at the helicopter above, at his own men surrendering. And then he made the decision Ava had known he would make ever since the night she heard him talking about the 60-40 split. He threw his gun to the ground, lifted his hands onto his head, and shouted, "It was her. She planned all of it. I was only hired help. I have evidence. I will testify." Paige turned and stared at Connor, her face white as a corpse. Betrayal was written all over her eyes, but this time, she was the victim of it, not the one delivering it. "You," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You promised." Connor gave a shrug, his expression untouched by remorse. 60-40, remember? He said coldly. "I do not do charity, and I sure as hell am not going to prison for you." Paige stood there for 1 second, her face shifting from shock to fury, then from fury to despair. Then she lifted the gun again, not aiming at anyone, just raising it as though she were about to do something mad and final. But the SWAT team did not give her the chance. 2 officers rushed her, kicked the weapon from her hand, and slammed her onto the wet ground. Handcuffs snapped shut behind her back with a cold metallic click. "No," Paige screamed, her voice wild with panic. "Do you people have any idea who I am? I am Paige Whitmore. My father will." But no one listened. No one cared. She was only a criminal being arrested, like any other criminal. The medics ran to Ava and Raphael. They gently pulled Raphael from her arms and lifted him onto a stretcher. Blood was still pouring from his shoulder, but he was conscious, still trying to look at her. Ava ran beside the stretcher, holding onto his hand. Tears still streamed down her face, but now they were tears of relief. "You are going to be all right," she said, though she did not know whether she was speaking to him or trying to convince herself. "You have to be all right." Raphael squeezed her hand faintly, the pressure weak but full of meaning. "Worth it," he whispered, his gray eyes fixed on hers with something in them Ava had never seen before. Warmth, tenderness, and perhaps love. "You are worth it." Then his eyes slowly closed, and he lost consciousness. But his hand still did not let go of hers. Ava ran beside the stretcher all the way to the ambulance, her hand still locked in Raphael's. Around her were sirens, Paige's furious screams as she was led away, the clipped commands of police officers, chaos everywhere. But in Ava's mind there was only one thought. He would live. They had won. And at last, the war was over. 6 months later, the Moretti estate in the Hamptons was no longer the cold and lifeless place Ava had once known. Spring sunlight poured through the wide-open windows, making the black marble floors shimmer like water. Laughter echoed through the hallways, and classical music drifted from the sitting room. Outside, on the lush green lawn, a golden retriever chased butterflies with its tail wagging wildly. Giovanna sat in the garden on her favorite wicker chair, throwing a ball for the dog. Her face was rosy and radiant, nothing like the pale woman she had been 6 months earlier. The doctor said she could live another 20 years if she avoided stress. And now there was nothing left to cause her stress. Justice had been done. Paige Whitmore received a 20-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and a long list of other charges. Her father, the head of the Whitmore syndicate, disowned her immediately after the trial. She was locked away in a federal prison, with no more white coats and no more high heels, only an orange prison uniform and concrete walls. Connor Walsh did not escape either. Even after turning witness against Paige, he still received 15 years in prison for his part in the conspiracy. His Irish mob empire fell apart not long afterward, torn to pieces by rival families. And Joey Caruso, the traitor, vanished. No one asked for details. No one wanted to know. In the underworld, there are some questions best left unasked. Raphael stood at the window in his study, watching his mother play with the dog in the garden below. He walked with a cane now, the wounds in his thigh and shoulder leaving permanent marks behind. But his gray eyes were no longer cold as ice. There was something warmer now in the way he looked at the world, in the way he looked at her. Ava was no longer a servant. She had become the head of the Moretti family's charitable work, a scholarship fund for orphans, shelters for abused women, support programs for the homeless, all the things she had wished for as a child, all the things that might have changed her life if someone had been there to help. Now she could be the one to help others. That evening, Ava stood on the balcony overlooking the garden, where Giovanna sat reading beneath the trees. Sunset had turned the sky gold, and the distant sea had become a vast mirror reflecting shades of orange and pink. Footsteps sounded behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. That uneven but steady step had become familiar to her. Raphael came to stand beside her, looking out at the same view. They stood in silence for a while, savoring the peace of the moment. Then Raphael spoke, his voice low and gentle. "I have something for you." Ava turned and saw that he was holding a small black velvet box. Her heart suddenly began to race. He opened it. Inside was a vintage ruby ring, the stone a deep garnet red, surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was breathtaking. "It belonged to my grandmother," Raphael said, his gray eyes fixed on hers. "She was a baker's daughter from Sicily when she met my grandfather, just like my mother. Just like you." He stepped closer and took her hand. "I do not need a servant, Ava," he said, his voice trembling slightly, something she had never heard from him before. "I need a queen. I need the woman who saved my mother when no one else dared. The woman who saved me when I did not even know I needed saving. The woman who turned this cold house into a home." He went down on one knee touching the floor, his cane set aside. The most powerful mafia boss in New York was kneeling before the housemaid who had once been invisible. "Ava Sinclair, will you marry me?" Ava looked at the ring, then at him. The man who had once been cold as ice was now looking at her with eyes full of love and hope. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling more brightly than she ever had in her life. "Yes, Raphael," she whispered. "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, the ruby catching the last light of sunset. Then he rose, lifted her chin with one hand, and kissed her. Their first kiss, sweet and full of promise, filled with love and the future. Down in the garden, Giovanna looked up toward the balcony when she heard Ava laugh. She saw her son kissing the woman she loved like a daughter. She smiled, and tears of happiness rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. "Salvatore, my love," she whispered, looking up at the sky. "Our son has found happiness at last. The war was over. The storm had passed, and at last, they were home." And that is the story of a phone call that changed everything. Ava Sinclair went from an invisible housemaid to a woman wearing a crown, proving that real power does not lie in money or fear, but in the courage to stand up for those who cannot protect themselves. Raphael Moretti learned that even a storm needs a safe harbor, that true strength is not never falling, but having someone willing to catch you when you do. And Paige Whitmore learned that money cannot buy class, and it certainly cannot buy loyalty. This story reminds us that in life, sometimes the smallest people carry the bravest hearts. Sometimes one decision made in a single moment can change an entire life. And sometimes love blooms in the places we least expect. What do you think of Ava's journey? If you were in her place, would you have had the courage to make that call? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would truly love to hear what is in your heart. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and share this video with the people in your life who love dramatic stories. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss more compelling videos every day. We sincerely thank all of you for staying with us until the very last moment. We wish every one of you watching this video abundant health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.